I will win the championship, and I will take that number one with me. He said it inside a room that had already decided he wasn't worth keeping. He said it knowing Ducati had already chosen someone else. He said it with the exact tone of a rider who had just been told he was replaceable. Then he went out and did exactly what he promised. He took the number, walked out, and left the factory with its own crown missing. That is not a title story, that is a theft report. Jorge Martin is not simply riding the 2026 season. He is carrying a scar that Ducati signed, stamped, and delivered. And the real cost of that decision is now sitting inside an Aprilia garage 4 points off the lead without a single clean race weekend behind him. The paddock calls it a comeback. That word hides what actually happened. He did not come back. He simply continued. Ducati left him. He never left the fight. Code approved it. Sprint win, final lap, medium rear tire, while everyone else chose safety. That is not aggression. That is calculation with a blade behind it. He did not dominate the race weekend. He did something worse. He stayed inside the limit while everyone else crossed it. Bagnaia crashed while chasing control in the sprint. Marc Marquez collided on lap 1 and paid for it with a long lap penalty on Sunday. Martin simply finished. That is the difference, not raw speed. Not talent, discipline under pressure. One rider is bleeding points in chaotic moments. The other is collecting them in silence. Marco Bezzecchi leads the championship with 81 points, 5 consecutive Grand Prix wins, 121 laps led without interruption. On paper, it reads like control. It looks like domination. But it is neither. It is exposure. Because every one of those wins came from the front, every one of those laps was led in clean air, and every time the race required real management instead of escape, he broke. Thailand sprint leading and crashed, Coda sprint chasing and crashed. The fastest rider on Sunday has become the least stable rider on Saturday. That is not a small flaw. That is a championship wound waiting for the wrong weekend. Jorge Martin sits just 4 points behind him, 4, after injuries. After surgery, after missing the physical peak of preseason, after adapting to a completely new machine that Bezzecchi has been refining for 22 races, Martin is not leading laps. He is placing himself exactly where championships are decided. Second in Brazil, second in America. He is not chasing wins, he is building a total. That is exactly how he beat Bagnaia in 2024. 3 Grand Prix wins against 11. The math did not reward speed, it rewarded control. Ducati learned that lesson too late. Aprilia is about to learn it from inside its own garage. Marc Marquez sits 5th, 36 points down. The reigning champion is riding a machine that does not respond the way he needs and a body that cannot fully commit. He is fast enough to qualify strongly and fast enough to fight at the end, but not fast enough to control the opening phase. And that is where races are decided now. He admitted it himself. The bike is critical, but so am I. That is not humility. That is a limitation stated out loud. The Marc Marquez who used to decide races in the first 3 laps is not on this grid right now. And while he rebuilds, the points keep moving. They do not wait. Ducati built this situation with their own hands. They ignored Bagnaia when he warned that the front end would not hold. They chose Marquez when Martin was asking for the same machine. They created a gap between performance and trust, then called it a strategic decision. That gap is now measurable, 0 podiums for Bagnaia and 5th place for Marquez in the standings. The GP26 is not leading this championship. The rider they removed from their system is. This is not Martin chasing Bezzecchi. This is Martin recreating his 2024 masterclass inside Aprilia, while Bezzecchi repeats Bagnaia's mistake in real-time pure speed without control, wins without management, points thrown away on Saturdays that will never come back on Sundays. The roles have changed, the outcome has not. The paddock likes to call Martin and Bezzecchi allies against Marquez. That sentence is convenient. It avoids the real problem. The real problem is that the biggest threat to Bezzecchi is not the rider 36 points behind him. It is the rider 4 points behind him, the one who already proved he can win a world title without being the fastest man on track. He is not here to help Aprilia beat Ducati. He is here to finish what Ducati started, and Bezzecchi is the one standing in his way. Aprilia did not sign Jorge Martin to support Marco Bezzecchi. They signed him because Ducati showed them exactly how to break a champion and what that broken trust turns into when it finds a new garage. That is the mechanism. Not speed, not form, not a simple decision. Ducati made it first. Mugello 2024. One sentence from Marquez. Pramac is not an option. Within 24 hours, Martin was out. Not beaten, not outperformed, removed. The factory chose a name over a system that was already delivering results. They told a rider who was fighting for their championship that he was temporary. That decision did not end in 2024. It carried forward into 2026 as a structural shift. You do not remove a contender and expect the consequences to stay in the past. They travel, they show up somewhere else, and they win there. Aprilia picked it up. Not by building a better bike overnight, but by placing two completely different operating systems inside the same garage. Bezzecchi is a pure frontrunner. Clean air, rhythm, control from lap 1. That is why he has 121 consecutive laps led. That is why he has 5 Grand Prix wins in a row. And that is exactly why he crashes the moment that control is threatened. Thailand sprint leading and crashed. Coda sprint chasing and crashed. His system works perfectly until it doesn't. When the race becomes a fight instead of a procession, the error appears. It is not random, it is repeatable. Martin is the opposite system. He does not need the front. He does not need control from lap 1. He needs position, awareness, and a race that lasts longer than the first 3 laps. That is why his 2024 title came with only 3 wins against Bagnaia's 11. He turned every weekend into a points extraction exercise. No waste, no overreach, no Saturdays thrown away. That system does not produce headlines. It produces championships. Put both systems in one garage and call them teammates. That is the mistake, because one system constantly exposes the weakness of the other. Every time Bezzecchi crashes in a sprint, Martin does not need to beat him. He only needs to finish. Every time Bezzecchi leads every lap on Sunday, Martin does not chase the win beyond the limit. He takes second. The gap closes without a single overtake between them. That is not rivalry, that is erosion. Marc Marquez sits outside this structure, and that is the second mechanism. Ducati gave him the GP26, but they did not give him a stable front end or a body that can fully exploit it. He has qualifying speed. He has late race pace. What he does not have is the first 3 laps. Coda showed it clearly. Collision on lap 1, long lap penalty, P5 finish with pace that only arrived after the race was already decided. The machine is aggressive, the tires behave differently, the shoulder is not fully recovered. Combine all 3 and you get a rider who cannot control the phase that decides modern races. That is not a slump. That is a structural limitation. Bagnaia warned them. Front-end instability, lack of entry control, no authority in the opening laps. They called it adaptation. They replaced the rider's feedback with a rider who could override it. Marquez did override it in 2025 with title dominance, but the underlying issue never disappeared. It waited, and in 2026, it returned. Even Marquez is now saying the same words. The bike is critical, but so am I. That is confirmation of the exact mechanism Bagnaia described. Ducati did not fix it, they only masked it. Now it is exposed. The paddock keeps asking how Bezzecchi stops Marquez. Wrong question. Marquez is not controlling races anymore. He is reacting to them. The rider actually controlling the outcome is in the same garage as Bezzecchi, taking fewer risks, making fewer mistakes, and closing the gap without needing to win every race. The real beneficiary of Bezzecchi's dominance is Jorge Martin. Look at the numbers. Bezzecchi 81, Martin 77, 4 points separate them. 1 sprint crash swings that. 1 long lap penalty for Marquez does not. The championship is not being decided between Aprilia and Ducati right now. It is being decided between 2 philosophies inside Aprilia. One burns points to dominate, the other stores points to survive. And the paddock keeps calling them allies. The cost is already visible. Bezzecchi cannot afford another sprint error. Marquez cannot afford another compromised opening phase. Ducati cannot afford to admit the problem they were warned about years ago. And Martin? He does not need to afford anything. He already paid his price in 2024 when he was told he was not the future. Now he is running a system that does not need to be the fastest to be inevitable. The championship is no longer about who is fastest. It is about who is wasting less. That verdict is already taking shape after just 3 rounds, and it does not point at the rider leading every lap. Marco Bezzecchi holds 81 points, 5 Grand Prix wins, and 121 consecutive laps led. That is the surface. Underneath it, 2 crashes in sprint races that cost him points he cannot recover later. Thailand, America, both times the same pattern. Control breaks the moment the race stops being clean. That is not pressure. that is a ceiling. A rider who must lead to stay stable is a rider who cannot afford a weekend where he doesn't. Jorge Martin sits 4 points behind. No domination, no streak headlines, just a sprint win at COTA and 2 consecutive Grand Prix second places. He has not led every lap. He has not needed to. Every time Bezzecchi converts a Sunday into perfection, Martin converts the entire weekend into accumulation. That is the system that already won a title against 11 victories. That system is running again. Different garage, same math. Less waste beats more speed when the calendar still has 19 rounds left. Marc Marquez is 36 points behind, 5th in the standings, the reigning champion with 1 sprint win and 0 Grand Prix podiums. That is not a form dip, that is a positioning problem. He is arriving late to the front group because he cannot control the opening phase. COTA made it visible. Collision on lap 1, long lap penalty. Pace that arrived after the podium was already gone. A rider who built his entire career on the first 3 laps is now strongest in the last 5. That inversion is not temporary. It is the consequence of the machine and the body not aligning at the same time. Ducati is paying for it across 2 riders. Bagnaia warned about the front. He now sits outside the top 5 with 0 podiums. Marquez overrides limits that should not exist, but even he cannot remove them every weekend. The GP26 is not the best bike on the grid. The results are saying it without saying it. Aprilia has won every Grand Prix so far. The factory that once dominated with 88 consecutive races featuring at least 1 podium is now watching another manufacturer dictate the race from lap 1. That is a power shift. It is already documented. Aprilia holds that power, but it is split. Bezzecchi controls races. Martin controls the championship. One leads every lap. The other makes sure every lap counts. Those are not the same thing. One creates dominance. The other creates inevitability. When those 2 collide over the next 19 rounds, the rider who wastes less will win. History already proved it in 2024. The same conditions are rebuilding themselves with different names. The real nightmare for Bezzecchi is not Marquez chasing from behind. It is the rider next to him quietly turning his perfection into a liability. Every time Bezzecchi wins from the front, he increases the pressure to repeat it. Every time he fails to repeat it, the cost is multiplied. Martin does not carry that pressure. He carries a margin. 4 points now. Enough to turn one mistake into a lead. Enough to turn consistency into control without ever needing to lead the race. The consequence chain is simple. Bezzecchi continues to push for perfect Sundays. That makes another sprint error inevitable. One error costs 8 to 12 points. Martin finishes. The gap flips. Marquez continues to fight an opening phase that limits his ability to take full points consistently. Ducati continues to search for front-end stability inside a frozen engine regulation that limits how fast they can recover. By the time the European leg begins, the standings will not reflect speed. They will reflect damage avoided. This is not a 3-way fight on equal terms. One rider is burning points to dominate. One is storing points to survive. One is trying to recover time that the calendar will not return. The championship will follow the one who stops paying unnecessary costs first. Bezzecchi is leading the races. Martin is leading the outcome. If a rider can win a championship without being the fastest man on track, and the fastest man cannot finish a weekend without losing points on Saturday, which one is actually in control right now? GP24 doesn't cover MotoGP. We cover its war.